views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Welcome to today's verdict. I'm your host and trial attorney, David Lesch. With the tragic events that unfolded last week with respect to the Bronx fire, Senator Majority Leader Chuck Schumer will be my exclusive guest. So stay tuned. Today's verdict starts right now. Senator, the Bronxites are devastated about the recent fire in the Bronx. Maybe you could talk to them a little bit about your 4-point safety plan, if you
Yes. Well, the bottom line is this never should have happened. And it would have been stopped had there been adequate regulation and adequate laws to deal with the problems that occurred. So let me go over the 4-point plan that Congressman Richie Torres and I have. And this would be in all federal buildings, but not just those that the federal government builds, but but any building that would have Section 8 or anything like that, including the building that was just so tragically on fire. 4 points. Number one, we are going to ask the Consumer Product Safety Commission, all space heaters should shut off. They shouldn't be allowed to go on. The space heater here went on and on and on.
Automatically shut off.
Automatically shut off. Second, all doors should automatically be closing. Had all the doors in this building closed, the smoke, which is what killed most of the people, not the fire itself, would have not been able to travel through every corner of this building. Third, we want to make sure that there's federal investigators available. So when there are these federal buildings, the federal investigators will be there. And the fourth is, what did I leave out?
Sprinklers.
Yeah. And the fourth, we would require sprinklers in every federal building. So let me go over the 4 points.
Sure.
1, space heaters that shut off. 2, doors that automatically close. Sprinklers in all the buildings. And fire safety investigators from the federal side to make sure these federal buildings are complying with what we've talked about.
Why haven't we had the investigators before? Why is it taking so long to have somebody from the federal level come in and take a look at these buildings?
There really hasn't been adequate federal investigators. They rely on the city and the state, but when it's a federal building, they should have the responsibility as well.
I just have one concern about the space heaters. My clients do everything they can, Bronxites, just to heat their apartments because there's no heat or hot water. They sometimes put the stove on, horrible things they have to do just to survive. How do you get them to throw out the old space heaters, which may not shut off automatically, and
Yes.
we're going to get them the new space heaters?
First we have to require that all new space heaters made are shut off.
Yeah.
And then there has to be, through the fire inspectors and others, an education of the folks in saying there are new space heaters that shut off automatically.
And my last question is with respect to the sprinklers. That could take months, years to really to put these sprinklers in these buildings. There are so many buildings in the Bronx that are so run down.
Look, there are so many buildings that are run down, and I know because when I was a young assemblyman, I organized tenants who didn't get heat. In fact, I was one of the first to come up with the idea is you put the money in escrow and require the landlord to do heat. We had the help of the Legal Aid Society to help us with that. But in any case, the bottom line is it's going to take a while for these things to happen. But if we don't do them, the likelihood of a tragedy in the future is greater than if we do, much greater.
So my son is a 6th grader at Riverdale Country Day.
Nice.
2 questions from 2 8th graders that the dean wanted me to ask.
Okay,
Very
go
nice.
ahead.
First is from Reese Moriarty. Reese asks, after hearing the tragic news about the fire and the urgency of it, is there anything you can do in a short period of time to help the people affected by the fire and those who maybe don't have insurance?
Yes, we're doing 2 things to help them. Number one, everyone in this building, or 90 of the apartments that were burned, have Section 8. But Section 8 just sticks to the building. We have changed the rules so they can use that Section 8 and find new housing anywhere. And there's available apartments in the Bronx, and HUD is giving them, as well as the city HPV, a list of available apartments and places to live, so they'll have a decent place to live. The second thing we've done at the federal level was, many of these people were immigrants from Africa, and they have relatives in Africa. The embassy had been closed in Gambia and other places because of COVID.
Sure.
We got these embassies open so the families can come and at least be together. Let me tell Reese, I saw the coffins brought in. I went to the funeral.
I've heard
it was tragic. And you look at the little coffin of a 2-year-old, just breaks your heart.
Last question from the president of 8th grade.
Oh.
This is the president, big shot.
Yeah, hail to the chief.
According to the Washington Post, more than 22,000 self-closing door violation notices were issued throughout the city in 2021 fiscal year, and 4,000 remain uncorrected. This fire was exacerbated by a faulty closing door. With that in mind, what legislation can be passed to force landlords to comply with regulations so tragic events like this do not happen again?
In non-federal buildings, it'll be up to the state and the city to do that because they control. But in federal buildings, just what we're proposing, Mr. President of the 8th grade, is that all doors be required to close and the federal government come in and do it, not just for new buildings, but for all buildings.
Well, I want to thank you very much, Senator. I really do so much appreciate it.
Keep up the good work, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Great seeing you
guys.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you so much.
Thanks for your.
All right, welcome back to today's verdict. I'm your host and trial attorney, David Lesch, with the eviction moratorium ending January 15th. A lot of tenants are afraid they're going to be evicted. We have with us today Pablo Estupiñan, and that's a tough name, by the way, Pablo, but I think I nailed it. I gave it the best I could there. And Pablo is a director at CASA, the Community Action for Safe Apartments. Pablo, thanks for being here today.
Of course, I'm glad to be here today.
Listen, it's a scary time for so many of the tenants in the Bronx who all of a sudden realize that they can be evicted. Where are they going to go? Shelters? Do they have another place? What is your organization doing to hopefully protect these tenants from the possible evictions that are occurring as we speak?
Of course. So we totally understand tenants' anxiety and worries. So as a tenants' rights organization here in the Southwest Bronx, CASA has taken many steps. We have been anticipating this moment. And as people might know, there's actually over 225,000 active eviction cases statewide through New York. What we have done in the pandemic is, in April of last year, we were able to expand the landmark right to counsel legislation. So going forward, any tenant in New York City that is income eligible will be able to get free legal representation in housing court to fight their eviction case. And we know from the first 3 years of right to counsel being enacted that over 80% of tenants with an attorney are able to stay in their homes. That's one.
Why is that?
Measure.
What do the attorneys bring that you would think sometimes, maybe if a tenant comes without a lawyer, that the judge is more sympathetic, right? Because this poor individual can't afford a lawyer. Let me see if I can work with them a little bit, help them stay in the apartment for a little bit longer, but it seems the other way around.
Exactly. That's what you would think, that judges would be more sympathetic to tenants without attorneys. But what we have actually seen is the opposite. And the whole reason we launched this campaign back in 2013 to make right to counsel a right for tenants in housing court was because we actually went to housing court. Our community members did observations of judges. There's multiple courtrooms where the cases are heard, and they only last a couple minutes, right? And oftentimes what you actually see in housing court pre-pandemic is tenants meeting with the landlord's attorney to settle, right? And so most tenants' fate over their homes are settled in a conversation with their landlord's attorney, not in front of the judge. So we've always said that eviction cases are not always about money. They're actually about landlords wielding power over tenants. And landlords have basically run housing courts for decades. And us being able to enact right to counsel and make it a right has been a game changer, because a simple fact is that we're leveling the playing field, right? Landlords always have attorney over 90% of the time. And back in 2012, it was less than 3% of tenants that had an attorney. So to be fair, you don't have a real fighting chance, right? So it's really leveled the playing field for tenants and being able to stay in their homes.
I understand that you're having some type of organization group effort. Can you tell the viewers a little bit about what you have planned?
Of course. So in the pandemic, we've been advocating for, at the beginning, it was cancel rent. What we instead got was a rent relief program that, as many people have probably heard by now, the funds have dried up to apply for the emergency rental assistance program. Despite that, we still encourage people to apply, because with the expiration of the eviction moratorium on January 15th, the simple fact that if you apply for the ERAP program or emergency rental assistance program, it will stop an eviction case from moving forward against you until the state makes a decision on your application. And so what CASA is doing is we have launched a campaign this past February 1st called Eviction Free Bronx. And we have several demands at the state level, which is we need $2 billion more in rent relief. It's estimated as of a couple weeks ago that over 400,000 households in New York City owe 1.4 billion still. And so we know that need is huge. And another key policy demand is we're actually campaigning for statewide right to counsel. So last Thursday, at the end of January, we had a town hall with politicians across the state to ask them, will you support and sponsor statewide right to counsel? While it's a right in the city, upstate New Yorkers don't have it. And this legislation would also strengthen our own here in New York City so that all tenants would have it.
I'm curious. Are they compensated, the attorneys that are coming in for the tenants? Is it a pro bono program? How does that work?
Yes. So when we wrote the legislation with community members, one key aspect was it matters who represents you. So the aim has always been for the city currently is partnering and funding with nonprofit tenant organizations. So tenant attorneys from nonprofits like Legal Aid Society, Legal Services are some of the big ones. And that's intentional, right? We don't actually want corporate attorneys or other firms that don't specialize in public interest to do that kind of work, because it's not just having a right, it's also the experience that tenants have. They need to have someone that understands what they're going through, maybe from the community just like them, and will advocate for them in housing court in a real way. Because it's not just, again, about whether you owe rent. Oftentimes tenants have conditions, have repairs, don't have heat or hot water. Those are defenses you can actually raise in housing court. And oftentimes you can be entitled to an abatement. A judge may order your rent to be reduced because of the conditions you were living in. And attorneys can help connect you to resources, such as one-shot deals to help keep you in your home or other benefits.
I constantly have my clients who come in and tell me that, they're in the danger of being evicted. And I tell them to go to 167th Street and take out an order to show cause, because most of my tenants tell me that these apartments are run down. There's no heat or hot water. Many things are broken. I said, that's the fastest way to get in front of a judge. Do you give that type of advice as well? What do you do when somebody comes to you with an emergency and says, I'm being thrown out tomorrow? What do you usually tell them?
It depends on a case-by-case scenario. If someone has been illegally locked out, then that's something to look out for and has been on the rise since the moratorium expiring, is we want people to know that they have rights. Just because your landlord or your super or a manager from the building tells you you have to move out, you don't. You actually have the right to go through a court process. So you can only be evicted if a landlord starts an eviction case against you in court, and a judge orders your eviction. And what you were alluding to, David, is what happens when you get a marshal's order on your door. You may have up to 10 days before the marshal actually carries out the eviction. And
that's
so
when you bring that order. That's when you get that order to show cause.
Exactly.
Way back when, Pablo, I was a court attorney here in the Bronx, and my judge was assigned to housing court for part of the rotation. And the worst things that I would see were the illegal lockouts, when they would lock you out and it was cold, and they had to come before my judge and ask for an emergency relief. Could be Friday at like 6 o'clock. before, we closed for the weekend and we would have to, issue something for the marshal to let the person back in. Do you see a lot of illegal lockouts anymore? Or is it just, was that something that I just would see in the mid 90s?
We haven't seen them as much, I think, due to right to counsel. But the other thing that is not captured in the data is people self-evicting. And that's why part of our eviction-free Bronx campaign is we want to spread awareness across the Bronx that people have rights, that you don't have to self-evict, you don't have to move out. Oftentimes, right, the law is that landlords have to send you a 14-day rent demand letter before they can start a court case against you. And those letters often feel scary and intimidating to tenants, right? They'll use words like surrender the premises immediately. And that feels like you have to move, but you don't. And that's part of our effort of why we launched this campaign last week. And not only that, but we are launching an eviction defense network. So we are actually, a part of our mission and goal is to reach those people who are getting warrant served eviction orders. They're starting to go out, and we want to make sure that people, you can actually, if you don't have a right to counsel attorney before, if you get a warrant served, you can now go back to court and request a right to counsel attorney, and you will have another chance to fight your case.
Well, CASA, you're doing great work. Pablo, we really appreciate it. Love for you to come on and maybe give us a little bit of update of how things are going. Right to counsel. Most important thing is get yourself a lawyer. All right, stay with us. Today's verdict has so much more coming up right after this. All right, welcome back to Today's Verdict. I'm your host and trial attorney, David Lesch. We have joining us today, Ligia Guallpa, the executive director at the Workers' Justice Project. How are you doing today, Ligia?
I'm very good. Thank you for having me.
I spent a good portion of the last 2 years ordering food online, delivered from apps like Seamless or some other apps. I guess they would call them third-party delivery apps.
That's
Never
right.
really thinking that those individuals who deliver the food may not be given as many rights as they should be given. So before we get into what your organization is doing to change that, to make sure that they are given everything they're supposed to be given, what has it been like in the past for these individuals who's been delivering food throughout the pandemic to every apartment building in New York City?
Yeah, so New York City is the home of more than 65,000 app delivery workers, mostly low-wage, Black, brown New Yorkers who have been completely excluded from any economic relief during the pandemic, were some of the hardest hit communities that were going jobless, without being able to access unemployment, without economic relief, really suffering the worst of the worst during the pandemic. So most of these workers actually turned into app delivery as a way to be able to survive the pandemic in a time where actually, food delivery online has been on demand, and New Yorkers have been relying in order to stay safe, to stay fed during the pandemic. What happened during that time is that New Yorkers kind of like did not realize the human being behind that app, right? That person that was delivering your food, your medicine, your groceries during the worst time, the darkest time of New York and in our country, happens to be workers who were excluded from being paid minimum wage, have been excluded from workers' rights protections, have been left out to do this work as independent contractors, and being unable to hold anybody accountable when they get injured, when they barely can make the minimum wage, being able to access to actually healthcare. And that turned a lot of frustration and anger of workers who were fed up, who said enough is enough, and turned to the street to demand that it is time not only for them to be recognized as essential workers in words, but that the best way for this city to recognize them is by delivering essential rights, such as access to bathrooms, the living wage, the ability to have more transparency when it comes to their tips, to have more power to decide how far they want to travel. And they put up 6 demands during actually the midst of the pandemic, coming out as a really strong, powerful movement as Los Deliveristas Unidos. And now they have realized that they not only are essential workers, but they have become a powerful, organized movement that are determined not only to transform the industry in New York, they're realizing that they have the ability to make real changes for the entire nation and to really transform this industry in a dignified work.
So let's say, I wanted to make some extra money on the side, and I approach Uber Eats or I approach Seamless. Do I make some kind of contract with them, or because I have nothing to do with the restaurants, right? They tell me where to go. Am I correct?
Exactly. So what is interesting in this industry, which continuously to be changing, right? And the companies keep adapting in a way to free themselves from any liability, right? So these companies enter in a contract with workers stating that the company is not responsible, right, in case of injury, that they are independent contractors, that they actually own this work, that the false myth that they're their own owners of their own jobs, and stating that they have no responsibility, nor their restaurant, that they're doing this work on their own. But the reality turns out that in paper may say that, but in the actual reality is very different. The apps do control the hours that they work, right? The apps do control how far they can travel, do control if they decide to deny X amount of deliveries, they get penalized for it or deactivated for it for most of the times. And actually delivery workers don't get to decide how much they get paid, because as an independent contractor, you put your price on your labor. And as in this industry, the apps are actually deciding how much they get paid. And in top of that, not only deciding, but in top of like not even guaranteeing a minimum pay, most of these apps are actually stealing workers' tips, which is outrageous, right? That they're making millions and billions of dollars, not only from the restaurants, from consumers, but they're also taking the tips of workers that actually belongs to the people and has become the only source of income for delivery workers.
So let's go through a few of these. Starting April 22nd, 2022, third-party delivery apps must allow food delivery workers to set limitations on distances they will travel from restaurants and which bridges or tunnels are willing to use. Am I correct? So I guess now the worker has to know how far they're going to go. Am I correct?
Yes, yes, they have to know how far they're going to go, but they're going to be able to actually decide how far they want to travel to, right? And this is a power that they didn't have. And the reason there has been accidents, more than dozens of workers have died in the street, is because they're being forced by the apps to travel 5 to 6 miles, cross tunnels, taking the risk to actually face injuries and fatalities. So now they not only have to disclose it, but they will also have to give the power to the worker to decide on the app, how far am I willing to travel?
Right, because you may not want to take this particular route. It's highly trafficked by trucks. There are no bike lanes, and now you're sending me over the 59th Street Bridge on that small little area that I have to cross over. It's too crowded. I'm not going. Right, so that's a big plus now.
Yes.
Here's another one. Provide upfront disclosure to food delivery workers about route pay and gratuities. In terms of gratuities, meaning how much they're going to get as a tip?
Yes, that's exactly what they mean. Some of these apps actually do not disclose the gratuity to the worker. So the apps is the only one that controls the information and decides how much they want to show to the gratuity amount to the worker. And that has been the real frustration of workers who have been saying, show me the receipt, show me my tips.
Right. Well, this one is insane. Pay food delivery workers at least once a week. They were not paid once a week.
Yes, some of these apps have been retaining the wages for workers for months and months.
So what did the worker do to try and get back their monies? Did they just not work anymore? Did they sue the employer? What did they do?
So there has been a lot of fear of actually demanding their wages, because one of the biggest fears of delivery workers has been, if I ask for my payment, would I be disconnected, right? So the fear has been, do I ask for my money or do I lose my job?
Horrible. All right, this one. I wasn't sure about this one. Provide a free insulated delivery bag to a food delivery worker after 6 deliveries. Why wouldn't they give them a delivery bag? I don't understand that.
And this is another challenge and issue in the delivery industry, right? So aside from these delivery apps stripping away from worker protections, they put all the economic responsibility on doing this work on the worker. So the worker not only has to buy a delivery bag that can cost anything between $80 to $100, have to buy their own bikes, have to actually buy their own like winter equipment. They have to actually put up front the cost of actually doing this work.
Do you think, based on the changes that are going to be put forth now, hopefully, that there'll be more individuals who want to do this kind of work? Will there be more competition, where some people will say, now there's too many people who want to do it, and I can't get a job with Seamless, and I can't get a job with Uber Eats. There are too many people. Do you think that could possibly happen, or no?
So there's two realities, right? So one of the things is that the industry is, I mean, if you looked at how fast they're growing, this industry is massively expanding it, right? Now they're not planning just to deliver food. They're expanding to pet stores. They're expanding to liquor stores. There's big mergers that are happening between these apps. And for these apps, actually, New York has been their biggest experiment, but also their biggest market in the country. So they're looking to expand massively. And they're setting up different models, right? So they're experimenting with New York by figuring out a way how they can subcontract workers massively to do this work in New York. So there is a high demand for this work. What delivery workers have been saying is, while there is a high demand of our labor, let's regulate the way we're going to be contracted by you. So what delivery workers are trying to do is rewrite or have a say in the rules of the gig economy. And what they have actually won are the most basic essentials as a worker, right? Which it will not impact the economy, right? In this case, because we're talking about a bathroom. We're talking about the ability to see your tip, right? The ability to control the distance. These are basic common sense demands.
Well, here we're gonna have to leave it there. We've run out of time. Just great stuff and so important. Those delivery workers mean so much to our economy, and they've been overlooked. It's a long time coming. Hopefully you can come back maybe in a couple of months to give us an update.
Thank you.
It's my pleasure. All right, stay with us. Today's Verdict has so much more right after this. Well, that's all we have for today. I'd like to thank our guests for joining us, and of course, you, the viewers, for watching. If you have an issue that you would like to see on a future edition of Today's Verdict, just feel free to email me at davidlesch@bronxnet.org. Until the next time, know the issues, reach a verdict. See you in 2 weeks.